Welcome to the Environmental Justice Lab. I am your host, Dr. Leslie Joseph. Thank you so much for joining me. It's a new year, and so we have a new series that we're going to work through because I got an email. I love responding to emails. I love when listeners reach back out and tell me they have ideas, tell me they have topics that they want to discuss, and I cannot wait to engage them on those topics and continue to move the conversation forward. And so I got an email from a young lady, Savannah Domenech. She attends Ohio Wesleyan University, and she told me that she wants to talk and to interact around this topic of legacy environmental justice. Legacy environmental justice. I hadn't thought about it. I hadn't really even thought through what it even means, or what it would look like, or how it looks on the ground. But she was telling me she's from Rochester, New York, and they had lots of industrial facilities there, lots of things happening. And what she was trying to get me to understand was that even after these facilities shut down, stop polluting, stop impacting directly in these communities in terms of their environmental pollution and in terms of all the ways that they would pollute the environment, she said there are still lingering, persistent environmental justice issues after facility is gone. And I said, that is really interesting. I had not even considered that because I've always been of the mindset that we're trying to get these polluters to stop polluting or to shut down their operations so that we can remove the injustices that are taking place. She was telling me that's true, but there are still impacts even after they stop. And so I said, look, you have to come on the podcast. We have to talk about it because I don't know how to think about these things. And so she was very kind, very gracious. She said, I will come on, do a series of episodes to talk about it. And I told her, I said, look, we can go as long as you want, talk about as much as you want, how you want to talk about it, because I want all of you listening to hear the story from her and to get her perspective and to get her view on what it looks like to experience and to be exposed to legacy environmental injustice. And so I am so excited because we've been recording over the Christmas break during the new year. And so this episode is the first of very many episodes about legacy environmental justice with Savannah Domenech. And so I hope you really enjoy this episode. They're going to be coming in succession, one after another. I'm not sure how long it's going to take to talk about this stuff, but we're going to keep talking about it until she's done talking and I'm done asking questions. So without further ado, please enjoy this first episode in a series of episodes about legacy environmental justice with Savannah Domenech of Ohio Wesleyan University. Enjoy. Welcome to the Environmental Justice Lab. I am your host, Dr. Leslie Joseph. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm saying us because I have a very special guest with me today. Savannah Domenech is with us, and we are going to be talking about legacy environmental justice. And I cannot wait to get into this conversation. Savannah, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you so much for having me on this podcast, Dr. Joseph.
Hey, we're glad you're here, and we can't wait to talk about all of the things. So for those of you listening, I got an email from Savannah about a month ago with some really interesting topics that Savannah wanted to talk about. And so I just wanted to give Savannah the floor, and we're going to talk about all kinds of different things. But the overarching idea is legacy environmental justice. And I was struck by this topic because in most environmental justice circles, the idea is You want to get rid of the facilities. You want to remove the polluting factories, and you want to try to eliminate any harmful activities happening in your community. But what Savannah was sharing with me was that even after that's done, there's a legacy of environmental injustice that continues beyond the life of that facility or beyond the life of that factory. And so I wanted Savannah to come here and tell us about it. And so Savannah's here, and I'm so glad. So before we get started, Savannah, tell us who you are, where you're from, and why this topic is something that you really want to talk about on the podcast.
Oh, sure, definitely. So my name's Savannah Domenech, as you mentioned earlier. I'm from Rochester, New York, which I'll talk a bit more later. It's in the state of New York. It's actually 6 hours from New York City, so not from the New York City area. And ultimately, I go to school at Ohio Wesleyan University. But the reason I thought about this topic and why it's so important to me is, so I was trying to figure out, like, oftentimes we so much hear about, like, the injustice is out there. It's over that way. But in reality, the injustice is also right here in your own backyard too. So I wanted to figure out, where is the injustice in my hometown? Because oftentimes we think about, like, the kids, oh, St. Gabriel, Louisiana, Flint, Michigan. It's all out there. But what about here at home? So originally I started looking at the factory downtown near my home, which is actually Xerox, not Kodak, which we'll be talking about later on this podcast. I could actually bike to the Xerox manufacturing plant if I had a bike stick, but that's besides the point. And so I thought about Xerox, and I was like, oh, I know they had like Superfund issues. Like, I know they were trying to build a church over there, and the church had to get all this paperwork done to make sure, they weren't building on polluted ground. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, I decided to go with a different facility, which is Kodak, which I'll talk about later, just because I just could not honestly find much on Xerox. It was just really hard to find anything. But on Kodak, there was oodles and oodles and oodles of information. And also, like, everybody in the town knows about Kodak. You can't not know about it if you live in Rochester, New York for any period of time. It is so deeply ingrained in its history and also in its pollution. So I decided to go, even though Xerox is, real close to me. For those who don't know, Xerox is a printing company. Used to be really big back in the, I feel like the 90s. It was like, oh, go Xerox that for me. Or, like, go print that for me. But I decided to go, what about this other big thing, too? And the difference is also, when it comes to legacy environmental justice, the Xerox plant is still there. It's still, making its printer products. So it's not truly legacy in the point that it's, the factory has shut down. It's still going. It's trotting along, even though it's not doing great. Kodak, on the other hand, Kodak went bankrupt in January of 2012. That factory, in terms of Kodak at least, is just, it's not really functioning its original purpose anymore. So ultimately, that is why I chose Kodak for its legacy environmental justice issue, which we'll be talking about today on the podcast.
Nice. Absolutely. So apparently in Rochester, New York, where you're from, there's a lot of factories, a lot of industrial activity. It feels like it's the kind of place that's inundated with these kind of polluting industries. Is that the case? Or is it just these two places and that's kind of all that you see? Are these two locations, Xerox and Kodak, are they kind of overrunning Rochester with pollution and those kind of things? And do the people that live there experience that in different ways?
So I guess the first thing I would say is, so it's not just Xerox and Kodak. In addition, there's also Bausch and Lomb, which makes like eyeglass stuff, if you're familiar with them. Those are the big three. Now, truthfully, are they still overrunning this town with pollution? My ultimate answer to that, in a sense, would be no. Bausch and Lomb was recently bought a few years ago. And as a result, most of the manufacturing has moved out of here. Kodak, as I mentioned earlier, went bankrupt. Some of they had their spin-offs, but most of it's done. Xerox, most of the buildings were actually sold. There's really not much more printers going out of Xerox. They've had tons of layoffs in the recent years. So I would say Rochester at one point, I think, was overrun with pollution, but we're getting to the point where it's just, these companies are just fading away, but the effects of them are not fading away.
So let's talk about those. Let's talk about those effects then. So how would you define or describe this idea of legacy environmental justice and legacy environmental injustice, and what elements would you see that would help you understand, okay, that's what I'm seeing, that's what I'm experiencing, that's what we're observing here when I look at Rochester, New York, or any of these other places that you mentioned? How would you describe that?
Yeah, so I would describe legacy environmental justice as essentially considering the leftover pollution that is left in these communities, and then also looking at, I mentioned all of these factors, considering the effects of this deindustrialization that it has on the town, as well as like the potential for urban decay. Essentially, in legacy environmental justice, the big difference between, like, if you will, like the regular environmental justice and the legacy environmental justice is that environmental justice is more about the active pollution, the active dumping, the active what have you that needs to be stopped. Legacy environmental justice, the pollution, for the most part, like the active stuff, it has stopped. The smokestacks are still not, billowing out all their chloride and other types of junk that we don't want in the air. But the effects are still there. And in addition, the social effects are still there. The economic effects are there. As I alluded to earlier, the environmental effects are there. And then also, I would say, governmental-wise, a lot of these communities do not have a good say in what is happening in the community.
Interesting. So, thinking about legacy environmental justice now, the idea would be that even though a facility is no longer actively polluting, actively dumping, there remains, after that facility's gone, I guess you would say, would it be residual or kind of lingering or kind of, baseline types of environmental pollution that still has an impact on people that live there, even though that active pollution is no longer taking place. And I guess then the idea would be that shutting down a facility isn't enough, because although you're not seeing any active pollution, you're still experiencing the impacts of what was previously done, even though that facility is no longer there. So can you talk about, what types of lingering effects you would see from a legacy environmental justice perspective, and what kinds of issues could still be ongoing, even though this facility is no longer there actively polluting our environment?
Yeah, definitely. And I really like that you used the word lingering, because like there's just still staying there. So, for example, if I think about it, so even though I mentioned like Flint, Michigan earlier, so right, in 1978, the General Motors plant shut down. They used lots of lead in their products, right? Because car paint had lead, car gasoline had lead, and batteries, in fact, still have, the lead acid batteries today. And then where did the General Motors plant dump all their waste? A lot of it, the Flint River. Flint River got really contaminated. And now I'm not saying that the lead in the Flint River is the reason why Flint's water is solely the reason, because Flint's water is, contaminated with lead today. But it definitely contributes to it. When they switched from, the Detroit River to the Flint River from Flint, Michigan, Flint River was nasty. Like, disgusting. Why was it disgusting? Because the General Motors plant made it disgusting. And so I think that's an interesting connection, that we can still see these effects. It's not just, 5 years down the road, it's all fixed now. We can see these effects, for even like across the generations. And then also other effects it could be is such as, like, if you contaminated the soil. Oftentimes, I would say the air pollution has, the air moves along its path, but soil, like pollution, like if you pollute the groundwater, like if you also pollute the soil, for example, a lot of like maybe water will permeate through the soil, get into the groundwater aquifer, and like, well, I will admit, Rochester, New York is typically on city water. If you go further out into like the more like rural areas, we're known for our cows. Apparently, we have a Fairlife factory coming in, but that's besides the point. A lot of people have well water, so now the groundwater is contaminated.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So soil, groundwater, and in the case of Flint, Michigan, the actual river itself kind of continues to be impacted by that pollution, even though those factories shut down. It's interesting, and we'll talk about this later, obviously. There's so much to get into, but there's the economics, and then there's the environmental, and then there's the kind of social aspects of it. And so there has been a lot of discussion in the news and over the last few, I guess, presidential cycles about manufacturing and where it's going and how we can bring jobs back and how we can have the kind of active manufacturing sector that we once had back in the 70s and 80s and maybe even before then. And so it's interesting because I don't know if people are aware of the impacts that these facilities have had while they were there and currently have, even though they're no longer operating or in existence. And so it sounds like Rochester, New York was one of those industrial centers where they had a lot of industrial activity, a lot of growth in terms of their productivity when they're producing products. And people like to go there to set up their factories, set up their facilities. And with whatever benefits seem to come to the city, one thing we can't deny is that these justice issues were problems then and they're problems now. And so I don't know if you've been back home or how much time you spend in Rochester, but I would love to hear you talk about what life is like there now. So, there was a Kodak facility there. There was a Xerox facility there. Bosch and Loam is been taken over, and, lots of things are different than they were before. And so can you kind of help us understand what life would be like? You said there was rural areas where there's lots of cows, and I guess there's a city center maybe, or an urban area that's more industrial. And so what is it like in Rochester now?
Yeah. So I guess there's different areas of Rochester. So two areas that are very prominent of Rochester so we have two major college campuses. They're huge, they're sprawling. So the Rochester Institute of Technology and the University of Rochester. So those are like their own little cities, if you will, kind of within Rochester. They're both private institutions. I mean, they're nice places to be. Mm-hmm. However, like if you go to like the Kodak Park community, the area surrounding the Kodak manufacturing plant, there's no denying that it's just not a nice area to be in. You can see on the news, the cops are constantly there because somebody got shot again. It's just a lot of old rundown buildings. Mm-hmm. It's just not the nicest neighborhood, shall we say. Regarding Xerox, if you go look at the Xerox plant, the Xerox plant's actually pretty much kind of in the middle of, I wouldn't say nowhere, but there's not a ton of houses around it, unlike Kodak Park, but the houses that are nearby it are actually low-income housing projects. So a lot of people are like, I don't really want to go down that way. Mm-hmm. And then you kind of balance this with the up-and-coming gentrification. It really is gentrification. That's like the giant, like, high-rise buildings that are way too expensive. I don't know if anybody affords to live in there. Mm-hmm. So you have, like, the not-so-nice areas of Rochester, and then you have, like, very, like, we're all young. A lot of ex-college students come live in there. We have our neighborhood of the arts. We have our cute little stores. Mm-hmm. So it's a balance, I would say. And I think once you really start to cross those neighborhood lines, you can really start seeing, okay, I'm in a different like city neighborhood now, because just how the houses looked, how they're maintained, and in a sense, Rochester isn't home to any of these, I would say like big. Your Xeroxes, your Kodaks, your Bausch and Lombs of the world. It's not home to a bunch of startups who are, guess what, run by college students. So in a way, it's kind of like the college students are taking over, which depends who you ask. Of course, the schools are thrilled that their alumni are doing great things for them and making them lots of money for, donations and stuff. But then they're like, well, they're like, okay, the college students are here, that's fine, but I don't want them sucking their soul out of my neighborhood and my community.
Oh, that's interesting. It's the college students doing it and the alumni doing it. Let me make sure I understand it. So when you talk about you talk about crossing neighborhood lines, and you can see the difference when you cross those lines. So when you cross this line into a really rundown neighborhood, is that where the plant used to be, in that neighborhood? And when you come back to where it's a nicer part of town, is that a place that was free from these facilities, or is there no correlation between the two?
I would say there is correlation. So the Kodak plant is, first of all, it's huge. So it's about 4 miles long. So you got a bunch of neighborhoods to the east, to the west of it, to the north of it, and to the south of it. The neighborhoods to the east of it, those are the neighborhoods that it's like, I'm not doing so hot.
Mm-hmm.
And then right after those neighborhoods, there's a river, the Genesee River, that divides the town. And then on the east side of that Genesee River, that's where the university is at. So it's kind of like they pour over the river. It's actually a pedestrian footbridge you can cross. If you can literally cross the line between the neighborhoods and just cross the river, and there you go. You're in the community now.
Interesting. Is there a sense, at least from maybe the college students' university perspective, that these kind of rundown areas are potential opportunities for them to expand or to redevelop or to operate in service of the university? Because I know for a lot of university systems, I don't know how big Rochester is in terms of universities, but I know here in South Carolina, other places, I went to school in Baltimore, Johns Hopkins, there was a sense in which if you're in a location that has these kinds of rundown areas, these kinds of dilapidated homes and businesses, there's an opportunity there for us to expand, to develop more of our campus into those areas, or maybe housing for our students, or restaurants and plazas that we can kind of sell to our students as ways of reimagining what this city or what this area could look like. Is any of that happening? Because I could imagine if college students are running the town, building businesses, what you said before, gentrifying and creating these types of environments that only certain people can live in, I wonder how far they're trying to take it.
Yeah, definitely. So, for example, I do know that, I can speak for the University of Rochester on this case, that a lot of their students and faculty, they're moving in to these communities that were west of the Kodak manufacturing facility. They're crossing the river, they're going west. The school and the city of Rochester government itself, with the mayor and everything, they're giving home ownership grants or renting grants to these students so they can go live in these communities. But the problem is these students, at least from what I understand, is they're not actually giving back to the community. They're not patronizing the local restaurants. They're not, supporting it. They're going back to the campus to go eat or something. They're going to the quote unquote nicer neighborhoods to go eat. Mm-hmm. So essentially, all they're really doing is living in these communities, and the communities are like, well, a lot of these people, with the exception of maybe the faculty members, the students are single for the most part. They're not families. You got your 6 students in one house, and they're not really they want families in those neighborhoods. But typically, they've been, family neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. So in a sense, there's that. And then also for the Rochester Institute of Technology, they actually drained a swamp to build it. So honestly, there's not many housing developments around there, but they recently did expand one of their housing opportunities to the downtown city of Rochester. They took over the old Xerox headquarters, actually, and turned it into a dorm for the students.
There you go.
So,
hey, no, I got it. That happens. It happens a lot. I mean, how does your family feel about how things are changing in Rochester? Do they have any concerns, or are they okay? Do they like what they're seeing, or are they concerned about the direction things are going in, or do they not have an opinion? What are your thoughts about that?
To be honest, I really don't think that there's much of an opinion. I mean, I think one thing that they're happy about is, so recently, the Rochester City School District is known for being horrendous in the graduation rates. However, they've greatly improved. I think it was 7 years ago, only 41% of students were graduating on time. Now we're up to 70, which is, I mean, it's still not fantastic, but it's a lot better than 41% or what have you. So there's sense that it's oh, okay, we like that, the schools are improving, but I don't know how much of that is due to COVID. Let's just move everybody through, because there was definitely a lot of that around here. But honestly, I mean, I think they're honestly, when I hear parents complain, I hear them complain about taxes. Oh, it's so expensive. Taxes.
Nobody likes taxes. Nobody likes taxes, especially if you believe that your taxes aren't actually helping your living situation improve or your community get better. And so I'm not sure if they're taking it that far, but I mean, a lot of people just don't want to pay taxes. It's fine. One day you're going to get a job and you're going to see those lines come off of your check, and you're going to have the top number, then all the taxes come out, and you're going to say, what in the world is going on with my check. I need more money, and things are expensive, and I don't know what we're doing. And so that's another discussion for another day. That's fine because I did want to get a sense of this community. You know, a lot of these types of environmental justice issues happen in very particular types of communities, particular areas, whether they be very working class, different immigrant communities, low income, minority populations. Like it's important to think about the kind of context that these things are happening in. And so I don't know much about Rochester, obviously. I mean, we all know New York City. There's always jokes about the different islands, Long Island, Staten Island, all these different places. But how would you describe the community that is Rochester and the people that live there and the people that, not just from the university that are kind of sticking around, but like the kind of, I guess you could say the legacy communities that existed in Rochester? Are these working class families? Are these upper class, lower class? Is it a mix in between the two? Are there different ethnicities? Any major immigrant populations that live there? How would you describe it?
Yeah, how would I describe? That's a good question. So I think I would describe it as, so if you look wholly like at the city, I would definitely say it's majority, it's lower income. Like of course there's your upper, usually your more wealthy areas, but it's majority lower income. And then especially in the recent years, you've had lots of people, urban sprawl has been a big thing. So who's the people who are getting left behind typically are, the minority communities who cannot, afford to, go urban sprawl out because
Mm-hmm.
of what reasons have you. In addition, one community that's very sizable in Rochester is the deaf community. So we have a very large deaf population here. We even have the National Technological Institute for the Deaf here as well. So that's a huge population as well. A lot of them do, to my understanding, live in the city.
That is
Um,
interesting.
yeah, and then also there's a lot of immigrant population coming in as well. For example, in recent years, we had large number of like Nepali immigrants coming in. Now we're on to Ukrainian immigrants, Afghanistan immigrants,
Mm-hmm.
and those are just the ones I know. So, like for example, my father volunteers to help teach them English. So those are he teaches them he teaches Afghani women, Ukrainian women English. So that's the reason I know that those are people coming in prominently because this is who he's teaching on a weekly basis. Conversational English, but I'm sure there are other immigrant groups coming in as well. And typically they're getting put in, these houses, which my father has visited some of them to, take them to their picture appointment. So they can get their driver's license or what have you. And he's like,
Mm-hmm.
it's just not really in a nice neighborhood. The house is falling apart. The refrigerator looks like it's from, the 80s. It's not like a nice place to be, which I mean, obviously I'm not sure who's, exactly resettling these newcomers, but they're being put in the not so nice areas of the city.
That is really interesting. So, how would you describe the reception of these immigrant populations from these different places? I know, I'm sure you know this too, immigration is a big hot topic across the country. And a lot of the concern is this idea of integrating these different immigrant communities, these different populations into an existing culture, whatever that culture may be. So, for instance, just full disclosure. So, my family's Haitian, and so this past election cycle, there was a big discussion about Haitian populations living in America. So, I don't know if you saw the presidential debate where the, I guess, president elect talked about immigrants in Springfield, Ohio, eating cats and dogs, and this idea that they weren't able to be integrated well into that community in Ohio. There were Haitian immigrants he was talking about. And I wonder if the city of Rochester, if your dad even has seen or has he experienced, the ways in which they've been brought over, kind of integrated in. I'm assuming they're working, they find housing, they're going to the grocery store, they're going to the doctor's office, they're in the library probably. Like, what has that been like for the city from your perspective? And is there anything that you wish was different about how they've been received and integrated into your community?
Definitely. So I feel like in the sense of how they've been received, given that like just like the geographic location of where they're coming from, people are more open to it. People are like, oh, I see, the tragedy that's occurring, in their home country. So it's like they're more like, it's not like. So I know, like for example, there's a lot of like complaints that it's like, well, and this will sound bad, like, oh, at least you're not Mexicans, we don't want the Mexicans, but you know what, the Ukrainians, the Afghanistan people, they're okay,
Right.
And then like the big problem is schooling. So a lot of them obviously they don't come here speaking English, and yes, they teach English as a second language or third language in the city schools, but like those classes have like 30 kids and they don't all speak like one language. We got friends who work in the city school districts, and they're teaching kids, and it's like, okay, well, this one speaks Spanish, this one speaks, Ukrainian, this one speaks Farsi, this one speaks that one. It's like I have all these resources. They're really under-resourced, to be quite honest. So these kids are really struggling trying to like learn English.
Mm-hmm.
And then regarding like jobs, for example, my father tutors one woman, like she'd be a doctor if she was back in her home country. But right now she's like, just doing something that's like, honestly, a 14-year-old could do, just give them the right training.
Mm-hmm.
Because you don't speak the language, it's like, well, we don't really have anything for you. Or it's like your credentials don't work here. You might, have all the credentials you want, but we don't accept them, kind of thing. But overall, I would say there is like acceptance, but it's kind of like, I'm not gonna like go out of my way to like, make sure you're feeling at home, kind of thing. It's just like I'm not gonna like say that like spread malicious rumors that you're eating cats and dogs like they were in Springfield, Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not like you're gonna be my best friend and I want to take you under my wing and make sure that both you and your kids, if you brought your kids with you, are gonna have a good life here.
Oh man. Well, that's good information to know, because all of that plays into and helps us see more clearly what kind of community is in existence with this legacy environmental justice taking place, or injustice taking place, I should say. And so, we're running up on our time. I don't want to hold you too long. We have so many things to talk about. And for our listeners, let me just tell you that there's going to be multiple episodes in this series of discussions about legacy environmental justice. I think we're going to talk about Kodak more specifically because they're the ones that have really made an imprint on this community. And we're going to talk about some of the different issues that relate to that. And Savannah's going to tell me more about his hometown and the people that live there. And it's going to be a great series of episodes. And so please stay tuned. Before we go, is there anything else you want to share with us about the good city of Rochester, or just your desire to look into this issue more closely?
I think it's just important to keep in mind the scale, and that this is not only an issue in Rochester, New York, but it is an issue that can be found throughout the United States and throughout the world as well. So I would ultimately really encourage people, like the reason I have looked into this issue so much is because it's here in my backyard. What issues, as you, the listener, what issues are in your backyard? What issues can you educate yourself more about? And then ultimately take steps to, moving towards more environmental justice in these communities. So I guess that'd be my challenge to the listeners. See what's in your own, your very own backyard, your city, or even like where you work. Because I'm sure there's something. Mm-hmm. You just have to look.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, thank you, Savannah. I can't wait to our next conversation. I can't wait to get more into this. But for now, you have been listening to the Environmental Justice Lab. I'm Dr. Joseph. That's Savannah. And we will see you next time. Take care.